Are going to talk about other health impairment this morning. So I'm going to kick us off and just cover some of the basics. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth because a lot of it you can read on your own. We really want to spend more time talking about that evaluation report. Sorry, my phone in the office never rings. Spend time with the evaluation report where we're really showing you how you connect that other health impairment to that adverse impact and need for special education. So Julie's going to do that part. So hopefully we'll spend some extra time on the back end. So here we go. And I'm sorry the phone's ringing. So we wanted to start off with some data. And so this is the new data. If you haven't looked at your special ed performance profile, this would be the plug for reminding you to do that, to kind of see where you fall with your eligibility rates and placements and all those pieces. So you can see on here, the updated data is for other health impairment across the state is 3%. And so when we're looking at your data, for your individual districts, we're looking at that 3% to see if you're significantly under or if you're significantly over that piece. And so Mary Corey provided us some great data. We all like these maps of Missouri because that kind of shows where pockets are. And so if you look at that tan, those are districts that are under 2% of their population with other health impairment. So those are going to be really more on the under identification end. If you look at the darker blue, the orange and red, those are going to be districts that are significantly above the 3%. And so when you're doing your tiered monitoring and maybe you get flagged for OHI, or maybe you get a lovely on-site visit from us for OHI, it would be because you're in that dark blue, orange, or red area along with some other risk factors. So it's just always interesting to look at the map and see where everybody falls out on that. In the meaning of words, 245 of our LEAs are over 3% of their population's other health impaired. And so that translates into 44% of our districts across Missouri are above the state average for other health impairment. And that's why it's really been on our target lately that we've been looking at more closely, and why we've added the indicator of observation. We're going to talk about the importance of observation when you're doing that initial eligibility for other health impaired. So 44% are above the 3%. And then you can see down there, there are 19.6% of the districts that are less than 1.6% of their population as other health impaired. So we're all kind of data people in compliance, so we always like to start with those numbers. So it really tells the why. Why are we talking about it? So when we think about our eligibility criteria, we always go to two places. We go to our Missouri State Plan for Special Education, and we go to our standards and indicators. So we're going to start with our Missouri State Plan and what that definition of other health impairment is. And so when we're looking at other health impairment, it means that this student is exhibiting limited strength, vitality, or alertness, which also includes that heightened alertness to environmental stimuli. And they do that, it's a result of limited alertness with respect to their educational environment due to that chronic or acute health problem. And so they can't just have the chronic and acute health problem. We have to do that comprehensive evaluation to determine how it's limiting their alertness in respect to that educational environment. So those are very important pieces to point out in that piece. When you look at that a little further, we're looking at that health impairment. We want that health impairment to have been diagnosed by a licensed physician, licensed psychologist, licensed professional counselor, licensed clinical social worker, or your school psychologist. And you have to connect how that health impairment adversely affects the student's educational performance. And I think I speak for everybody in compliance. That is the piece in evaluation reports and IEPs that's really missing, that connecting of how that health impairment is adversely affecting the student's educational performance. We do a lot of regurgitation of verbiage from the standards and indicators. You know, every other health impaired eval report will have the verbiage about limited strength, the vitality, and alertness, including heightened alertness. We've really got to isolate which one is the student exhibiting and how is that adversely impacting their educational performance. And hopefully by the time you look at the myth of the month that was just published and Julie goes through about a sample evaluation report, that will help make that a little clearer for you. When we go to the standards and indicators, we'll be in the 1300s for other health impairment. And so the very first one, 1310 A and B, is how you're documenting that comprehensive health evaluation. So do you have that diagnosis from that licensed physician telling them what they have, the date they have it? For conditions that don't require that medical diagnosis, such as ADD or ADHD, you can document then that comprehensive evaluation by the licensed psychologist, licensed professional counselor, social worker, or your school psych. So very important that you're documenting what is the chronic acute health condition, who diagnosed that, and on what date did they diagnose that. 1310 A and B is not enough. There's an and, there's always an and in special ed. And so our and is the C. Your documentation indicates that the health impairment results in that limited strength, vitality, or alertness, including heightened alertness. This is the indicator that we see regurgitated in evaluation reports. When you use this statement, you need to then say, which one does the student exhibit and what are the pieces of data or what is the information from the evaluation report that supports that. Just regurgitating this indicator in your evaluation report will not get you compliance, okay? You've got to explain what that looks like. And Julie's going to show that later on. 1320A is that you have completed that comprehensive educational evaluation, and so that you can clearly document how that impairment is adversely affecting them, as well as their need for special education. You're going to have a documentation describing their educational concerns. And so whether you're pulling those educational concerns from maybe an achievement test or their observation or both, again, you're not just regurgitating these standards. You can state that standard, but then you're going to have that individualized statement of what in the evaluation report shows the educational concerns that are tied to this. And then C, 20C is our new one, and that is the information gained through observation completed in a variety of educational settings. And so this was new because a lot of, well, most of the evaluation reports for that initial eligibility were really not drilling down and getting to what is the adverse educational impact and where's that need for special education. So when you're doing an initial OHI eligibility, you're going to be doing formal observation of that student across a variety of educational settings. And I think that it's important for the team to talk about where are those settings that you're most likely going to see that adverse educational impact and need for special education. The when you do these observations and the how is very important. The observation is that culminating piece that really ties everything together. The observation is showing that your evaluation results are accurate, and when this student is in a classroom with 24 others, this is what they look like. And so we can't ever understate the importance of that formal observation. I think sometimes we're all pressed for time, and so sometimes that observation is this thing that we just know we have to do, and perhaps we're not really talking as a team or really thinking about where and when do I really need to get that information. And so I would encourage you to really think closely about your formal observation and to make sure that you have data that really supports that adverse educational impact and need for special education. The state plan and standards and indicators give you some definitions. And so we wanted to include those. So the definition under note 1 for limited strength really refers to the student's physical strength and their energy. It would also include their lack of endurance for fine or gross motor activities. Perhaps they have poor trunk control. Perhaps they're slouching like I feel like I am in my office chair because I'm not at home. Perhaps they tire easily. You see some decrease in muscular power. Those would be the things you would be looking for. It can also refer to their emotional stamina, how they respond to stress and pain. And so all of those pieces are very important if you're talking about limited strength. And so you would really be drawing that information out in your evaluation report and your observation, making that connection. If you're talking about the limited vitality, that's defined in note 2, and it really refers to their capacity for endurance, which that's going to be more your duration, intensity, and frequency over time. You're going to be taking into consideration their level of sustained energy or effort displayed by the student. So if that's a secondary student, how do they look at the beginning of the class period compared to the end of the class period, or the beginning of the lecture to the end of the lecture? You would be looking at those pieces when you're doing your observation. When you're talking about limited alertness, That's defined in note 3. And so that's really going to be talking about their mental processing, their ability to think clearly, their ability to manage and maintain their attention and awareness, sustain focus over time. And it can also include that heightened alertness. When you're talking about heightened alertness, you're really talking about the student that's overly observant, they're watchful, or they're always on guard. When you're always on guard and observant, then you may not be tuning in to your instruction. So taking into account how those notes define those pieces can maybe help you as you're thinking about your observation and what you're really looking for. Do we have any questions we need to answer before we leave Missouri State Plan and Standards and Indicators?
There was just a question about using observations that actually came from the medical report. And my response was that it depends on how that supports adverse impact. And maybe, yeah, sometimes maybe people came into the school and actually did observations for that medical report. So, I mean, I guess that sometimes does happen. So it would really depend on that situation.
I think we always have to keep in mind our job is to prove what is the adverse educational impact at school and that need for special education. And so, you know, while we're always looking at that whole child for adverse impact, if the doctor hasn't really addressed those academic things, or the doctor hasn't seen them in a classroom with 24 others, then we would need to have that data to back that up. So there's a good old, it depends, like Bailey's shirt says.
Right. There's also another question about how many observations would you recommend to be in compliance? And I think that depends again. It says a variety of settings. I think that pretty much lends itself to it's probably more than one. I guess in some weird situations, you might be able to do a variety of settings with one observation. I mean, I guess if somebody followed a kid around, you could say it's one observation, but they saw them in several settings. But really that you need to be able to support that there is adverse impact either through a limited strength, vitality, alertness, or heightened alertness to environmental stimuli. And generally, you probably need more than one observation to support that.
I completely agree. And as we go further into this presentation, we do talk about observations just a little bit, but you have to have enough observations to either support this child as a child with OHI, or if you're going to find this child ineligible, those observations help make or break your case for your eligibility decision. So it depends. I would think it would take several. When you're talking about limited strength, vitality, alertness, or a heightened alertness, you're really looking at how are they doing in the morning? How are they doing after lunch? And what about the last period of the day? When do they really begin to show that limited strength, that limited alertness? So several observations may be required.
And I think some of those don't necessarily have to be lengthy, but I think for a kiddo where you're looking at OHI, you're probably looking at them in the hall at passing time. You're probably looking them at unstructured time like lunch or recess, in addition to what that classroom looks like. You know, you guys know that kid, you know, if they've got discipline where that's occurring. And so I think that you have to be mindful of all the information that's in your review of existing data, because you're really talking about determining you're going to do that formal observation after you've just reviewed that review of existing data. And so in the perfect world, and if that's a meeting, then you guys would be talking about, okay, whoever is observing this student, you know, we want to look at them in these types of settings. And so again, that's perfect world. We are all busy. We know that doesn't always happen, but I think that the observation has just become something that we have to do, and we're not really thinking about the purpose of it. And it's Julie said, your observation can really make or break your eligibility. We've read observations through file reviews that absolutely do not support eligibility or do not even address anything academic. And so the whole purpose of observation is to see what that kiddo looks like in the classroom, to see how they're doing on their work samples. How does that compare to the average peer or those grade level expectations? So, all right, we're going to move on and talk briefly about your assessment practices and procedures. The IDEA says that each public agency shall conduct that full and individual initial evaluation in accordance with federal law. And when we talk to districts through on-sites or tiered monitoring or training, there is that misconception that because the student has a medical diagnosis, they automatically qualify for IEP. That's a misconception in the medical community. How many times have we gotten those scripts from doctors that say student has such and such, they require an IEP? They still have to go through a comprehensive evaluation at the district level because you have to prove that adverse educational impact and need for special education. So just because parent brings in a script or a report that says kiddo has this condition and needs an IEP, you don't automatically go to that. You still go through the full evaluation report because you have to prove that they're a student who's eligible for special education. There's several bullets on this page and next that are outlined in federal law. And so we bolded some that we really want to draw your attention to. So the variety of assessment tools and strategies, that's really key so that you're not just always doing the same battery, no matter what you suspect. So every kid gets a WIS-5 and every kid gets a KTEA. Regardless of what you suspect. You really want to individualize your assessment plan based on what you suspect. If you go in suspecting other health impairment and maybe a specific learning disability in some areas, that's going to determine what you're going to administer for that assessment. Many of you've all heard that we're getting the ARP COVID money that's going to be coming to you all straight through an allocation sometime in the second part of this school year. If you are struggling with your assessment tools or you don't have a great battery, this might be a time for you to think about how could you beef up your assessment test library and purchase some of those with some of your ARP funds. So maybe be thinking about that piece if you have some holes in your evaluation plans or things that you just think aren't really getting at what you need for information. A lot of schools are going together and kind of creating an assessment co-op. And so one district will buy one assessment, another will buy another one, and then they share those assessments and each district just buys their protocol. So really try to think creatively on how can you build your test library so that you can really be doing some more comprehensive evaluations. Make sure that you're really looking at those specific areas of educational need. When you do that review of existing data, you're really talking about what are those deficits? You know, do you feel that the other health impairments creating some reading issues? Is it writing? Is it math? That determines what assessments you're going to give. So really be thinking through that piece. The reminder that no single procedure is ever used as the sole criterion. You are doing the comprehensive evaluation and you're looking at all of the data and all the information to make your determination. You're looking at all areas of suspected disability. And again, those keywords, sufficiently comprehensive to identify all of the students' special education related services need. That evaluation report should, by the time you get to your basis and synthesis, it should be very clear what that student's needs are and what those next steps are. And then making sure that your tools and strategies and your observations are providing relevant information to help determine those needs. If you're doing a really high quality observation, you can get a lot of your data that you need for your present level of academic achievement and functional performance off of that observation. If you're analyzing work samples, that gives you some baseline information. Again, for that initial IEP, you've got to have that baseline information for your goals. So the observation can really help you with that piece. Anything, Jeannie, we need to address before we go on?
Jeannie, you're muted.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There have been a couple of questions. One about an observation form. Is there one available? And Tiff answered it and said, no, there really isn't a specific form available. I mean, some people do have them. So again, LACE groups might be a place to ask what other people have and are doing. There was another question about, I'm assuming that this was on a reeval. When you're doing a red for a reeval, do you have to do additional observations? The answer would be no, but we would expect to see in that review of existing data that there is basically observational information that supports that this kid does still does still have these adverse impacts as a result of that limited vitality, alertness, or whatever those other things are. And that they still need to be identified as a student with a disability. So do you have to do additional observations on a reeval? No, but we would expect to see the proof basically that this kid is still disabled in that review of existing data.
I always tell people that when they're writing the review of existing data on a 3-year reval and the team has determined no additional assessment, please remember that that reeval needs to be very comprehensive within itself. It needs to show what is the chronic and acute health issue. It needs to discuss how does it show limited strength, vitality, alertness, or heightened, and then what's the educational impact. That red needs to be so comprehensive, it stands by itself. And if me as an educator would look at it fresh, never looking at it before, it should have so much information. I can write a present level performance, and from there be able to write the goals with the team. So it needs to be so comprehensive it can stand by itself.
Okay, we good to go on, Jeannie, or is there more?
Yeah, well, there was one other question about does the medical diagnosis automatically say there has to be a reason to suspect? And the answer is no. You still have to do your due diligence from the school level to determine whether or not you suspect a disability, because you do see some kind of adversity going on or some kind of problem with this situation. So that's an individual decision. There is absolutely no requirement that just because the kid walks in or the parent walks in with a medical diagnosis that we have to evaluate. We have to look at it and decide whether or not we suspect a disability, but we do not have to automatically determine that there's a suspicion of a disability.
Correct.
I think that is pretty much it.
Okay. So you are going through that review of existing data. And so one of those areas you suspect is other health impairment. And so what does that really mean for you guys as you're thinking about how you build that evaluation plan or what data you're looking at? So when you suspect OHI, obviously that health section is a very important section that you're going to have in there. You're really going to make sure that you have documented what the health condition is. You're going to document the medical professional by their name and title that diagnosed the condition. You're going to list the date of the diagnosis. I think that it's very important that you have a list of medications they take. And we know sometimes parents are changing medication. They may have 3 med changes from the referral to you get to the eligibility decision. But documenting those throughout the process is important because sometimes medications that students take will affect their strength, vitality, and alertness when they're taking a medication for their chronic or acute health condition. So don't overlook the medication list. You are starting to lay the foundation at the very beginning of that process about how this medical condition is limiting their strength, vitality, or alertness in the educational setting. So from that referral in that red, you're building your case. You're talking about how does the student perform compared to the average peer? How do they perform academically compared to those grade level expectations? Sorry. And you're getting information from the teacher about what that kiddo looks like in the classroom. If you haven't got a release of information to get records from the doctor, we would all encourage you to do that so that you can get the doctor's notes, maybe be able to talk to the doctor or the psychologist throughout the evaluation, and so that you can include that. So don't forget about that release of information. Even if you have something from the doctor with the information you need, you might be able to get some more information from them. When you think about looking at limited strength and vitality, maybe it's appropriate to do some gross and fine motor assessment to look at that. In the area of cognition, you can really look at your cognitive assessment and the interpretation of that for limited alertness. Did they have some lower scores with processing speed and inattention to detail? That can help you prove limited alertness. So again, it's very important that you're reading those test interpretations and you really understand what those numbers mean and what they're assessing so that you can draw some of that information out to use in your basis and your synthesis to support your decision. Adaptive behavior could be an area that's impacted. Perhaps they have limited strength or vitality with their personal care or their independent living. I think sometimes we might overlook that area when we're suspecting OHI, but your adaptive behavior scales could give you some clues as well. Certainly, most of the time, I think we go ahead and assess in the area of academics when we're looking at OHI. And so looking at those scores in there to help you with where is the chronic acute health condition really impacting them, using those multiple observations in a variety of settings to help you with that. When you look at the myth of the month, there are some misconceptions across the state that a student with other health impairment has to have that 22-point discrepancy to have academic impact. The only time the 22-point discrepancy is used is for a specific learning disability. And so that's kind of a misnomer that we find in some sections of the state. So that's addressed in the myth of the month. So again, you're not looking for some number when you're looking at other health impairment. You're looking at your data to show where this chronic acute health condition is impacting them. Certainly social emotional, you're probably going to do some assessment in this area. Maybe you're going to do, if they're ADHD, you're going to do some ADHD rating scales. Those are certainly going to help document limited or heightened alertness. And your social emotional behavior scales can show some limited vitality. So don't forget to look at that area for scales. And of course, always if that kiddo is going to be 16, you're going to do some post-secondary transition. So when you're talking about determining their eligibility, again, that is when you've completed all the administration of tests and their evaluation materials, and a group of qualified professionals come together, which includes the parent, and you're going to determine whether this child is a child with a disability under the IDEA. I always tell you, it's a pet peeve when we say we're diagnosing a student with other health impairment. We do not diagnose kiddos. We identify students with an educational disability under the IDEA, or we determine the student meets eligibility criteria for an educational identification under IDEA. So we're not diagnosing them with an educational disability. We're identifying them or determining they meet eligibility. And again, I know it's semantics, but doctors are diagnosing, we are determining eligibility. So when you're using your data to make that determination of a child with a disability, you have properly evaluated them with an evaluation that's sufficiently comprehensive. They have met the criteria. In this instance, that means they have a medical diagnosis of a chronic acute health condition. Your evaluation clearly shows adverse educational impact, and it shows their need for special education. You have to have all of those components to say a student is a student with another health impairment under the IDEA. So when you think about that, you know, we always toss up our three-legged stool. So again, just because they have a medical diagnosis of a chronic acute health condition doesn't automatically get them an IEP. You've got to have all three legs of the stool. So your evaluation report has to show adverse educational impact, and it has to show that need for special education. When we think about what does adverse educational impact mean, IDEA regulations, Missouri state regulations, and OSEP really haven't defined that. And so, you know, what happens when that occurs? The circuit courts start defining it. So courts have said that we take a 360-degree view of the child when we're looking at adverse educational impact. So we're not just looking at their academic skills. We're looking at their social emotional behavior skills. We are looking at the whole child, not just their grades or their ability to do work. So you're looking at them again across those variety of settings, and how is this chronic acute health condition impacting them? And their need for special.
Can you guys actually see this?
Instruction is important. So the definition for specially designed instruction, because that's what we do when we put a student in special education, we are adapting as appropriate to the needs of that eligible child. We're adapting our content, our methodology, or how we deliver the instruction. We are making sure we're addressing the child's unique needs that result from the disability, and we're ensuring their access to the gen ed curriculum. And those unique needs encompass far more than just the mastery of academic subjects. That is academic, social, health, emotional, physical, and vocational. We are meeting the students' educational needs. If you do not have that adverse educational impact or that need for special education, then perhaps you're looking at, does that chronic acute health condition limit a major life activity or function? And so perhaps a 504 plan is appropriate. So you must have all three legs of the stool before you get an IEP. So lots of things we hear, we go to districts, we'll hear, well, they transferred in with an IEP for OHI, so we just accepted it. Again, once you accept something, you are responsible and held accountable for that. So if you receive a student that transferred in and their evaluation report does not clearly document adverse educational impact and need for special education, don't accept it, because once you accept it, it's yours. We frequently hear, well, they've got a diagnosis of ADHD, so we thought they automatically got an IEP. Not the case. You have to prove that there's adverse educational impact and need for special education. We also have had those that they've got a diagnosis and it's progressive, so they're going to get worse. So we're going to do it, because we don't know when they're going to get worse. You're always addressing the student where they are in that point in time. And so we're not putting a student on an IEP because they may get worse. You address that student as things change. And so you must have that adverse impact and need for special education at the time you're looking at them. Okay. I think, this is Julie's part. Do we have anything? Oh, Vicky's waving.
Yes.
Vicky's waving.
Yes, we have some others too. So
Okay.
Sorry, I was trying to politely interrupt you, but someone
It's
muted
all
me.
good.
Hey, I just have a question about that. So a student moves in, they've been evaluated in Missouri and someone else determined that they met eligibility criteria. We have a brand new student. I would not feel comfortable telling my team that you need to override professionals in another district if you don't know the kid. How would that hold up?
Well, I think one thing you could do, and anybody else wants to jump in, you could either accept it and then you could wait and monitor the kid and then maybe decide you're going to go into a reeval if you're not seeing those same things. Or if you reject it, you still have your 30 days to get your red and your 60 days. So you're going to be 90 days down the road. And so, within 90 days, your teacher should have a pretty good idea of what they're seeing with that kiddo. So I think too often when we're doing tiered monitoring, we see those districts that have accepted evaluation reports that don't make those connections. I mean, if you get an evaluation report that clearly makes those connections, like Julie's going to show in some examples, we wouldn't override that. But when you get some of these evaluation reports that are, 4 pages in length, and there's really no discussion or support of adverse educational impact or need for special education, that's really your cue that, hey, we can't accept this because it doesn't support all 3 prongs. We're going to have to do our own assessment and our own observations and use our evaluation timeline to get through that.
And I get that, but we've always been told once the child has met eligibility, it's our responsibility to determine they no longer need specialized instruction. They never have to meet that eligibility bar again. So that makes me super uncomfortable to say, we're just going to reject. So they've gone through it for whatever. I mean, for whatever reason, there may be people out there making bad decisions, but I feel like that's a monitoring thing that needs to take care of that. I would feel uncomfortable saying to my team, so accept it. And then 30 days from now, we're going to look at a reeval because we don't think the kid meets it and we have to send them back through the initial. I mean, at that point, we would just be looking for programming purposes, correct?
Right. Yeah, because they don't have to meet it again.
So they wouldn't meet initial again. So we're really, no matter what, you're still, the child has gained a ticket to the magic room.
And I think it's hard, and I'll give you some examples of reports that I've looked at where I would have rejected them. There is no clear line to adverse impact or need for special education. They've literally documented a diagnosis. They have maybe given an academic test, and that's it. A lot of times, Vicki, we'll see them, they haven't even done any ADH rating scales. And so there is nothing in the report that shows adverse impact or need for special education. And that's the problem. When we look at those percentages of districts, when 44% of our districts are above the state average, there's probably some over-identification in there. And we find those through monitoring. That's why we're looking at other health impairment through the tiered monitoring process and on-sites is to help correct that. And, you know, the topic for the myth of the month, and drawing that awareness to, you've got to have those 3 prongs. And hopefully having that formal observation piece will help teams be more cognizant of that and really have that data to prove that adverse educational impact and need for special education. But I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, I would just be curious if that would hold up, if you got challenged in a due process with that. I wonder what school attorneys, if they would support that. I understand you're looking at it from a compliance thing.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking about the,
Yeah.
you know.
And
I
this is
would,
that-
but you
I'm
guys
just curious.
don't forget, if that kid still needs it, I mean, if what you can show is that whether they did it correctly or didn't do it correctly, if this kid is still showing that there is adverse impact as a result of those 3 things that they're, or one of those 3 things that they're limited in, then there's no issue. Even if you didn't do it correctly and the kid was eligible incorrectly, there's nothing that says we have to say, oh gosh, well, you didn't have a comprehensive eval, or you didn't really show any scores on an assessment that would make us think that you needed special ed. That's where it comes down to, do you still need special education? And if the answer is yes, then it doesn't matter who did it right or wrong. But we've now gone back and really are documenting that need. I think that's where, that's what's subjective. You know, teams have to decide, do you still really need this? Even if perhaps the person who did the evaluation in the first place didn't do such a great job with it. I think
I would want an evaluation report that then documented those pieces clearly. I would rather, you know, you can document that they came in with that, but I would want to have that supporting data that yes, they are still a student with a disability because of these things. But again, it's always a, you know, it's always a $64,000 question, because you never know what an attorney's going to say or a hearing officer is going to say with any of these pieces.
And it goes back to, what is that specially designed instruction? If what we've been saying, you know, if what was actually happening was that somebody was just checking the kid's planner and somebody was just, you know, making sure that the kid did his homework,
He's using
really specially designed instruction. And again, that's a question that the team just has to answer. End of story. So, okay, there were a couple other questions too that I think we probably do need to address. There were a couple different people asked about, we don't have a comprehensive medical evaluation. We don't have anything that says this kid is ADHD. But when we look at behavior rating scales, you know, clearly somebody referred the kid because they were struggling. When we look at behavior rating scales, it's pointing to that. Can we still find them eligible? Well, first and foremost, you've not met the criteria. There has to be a comprehensive, some kind of evaluation, either by a medical professional or by one of those other licensed professional counselors or school psychs or whatever, that actually says, yes, in fact, this kid has some kind of a medical condition. So in that review of existing data, if there is nothing there and you think you might be going to suspect that this kid could actually be OHI, if that stuff was there, then somehow we either work with the parents to get that done by either them agreeing that they're going to take their kid to the doctor, or we have to pay for that. I mean, we have to be responsible to make that happen. Now, again, I say pay for that. Some of you have school psychs on staff. So the school psych could actually do that piece of the evaluation. But we can't, that is a piece of the criteria. You can't ignore that piece of the criteria just because you happen to have a behavior rating scale that indicates that there may be some attentional issues. So somehow or another, if that's necessary in order for the kid to get what he or she needs, then that's going to have to happen. The second question that I think we have to address is, and I'm going to address this in a far more global way than Bev was doing it in the chat. Can a kid with autism or some of those other medical diagnoses, because autism can be a medical diagnosis and that is pretty chronic, can those kids actually qualify under OHI? And the answer is, if they meet the criteria, then yes, they can. But you have to do that good comprehensive evaluation and look at the criteria for all of those areas to decide whether or not whether or not they qualify in any of those areas. And they may actually fit and qualify in one area better than another. And so there's nothing that prohibits those kids from being identified as OHI. Again, comes down to your comprehensive evaluation. So I think we have to, it is more than just what the doctor says or what the doctor doesn't say. It's bigger than that.
All right,
Jeannie?
Julie.
Okay, I didn't know if there was another question.
No, I think that was all that I saw, unless there's been some come in since then.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and we'll keep rolling. So here's my disclaimer. I'm going to show over the next several slides some examples of how you can show within the body of your evaluation report medical condition, the limited strength, vitality, alertness, and the adverse educational impact. So these are suggestions that you may find to be valuable, and maybe you'd like to take some of them and start using them. So I'm going to talk about what are considerations in your evaluation report. And then I'm going to give you some examples. So Amy alluded to earlier, she talked about the health section. So what I like to see in an evaluation report for OHI is the medical history of the acute or chronic medical condition. If mom and dad are willing to share that, or they've signed a release and the doctor can share that, that's a good piece to put into your eval. Remember that when you think about an evaluation, you should be reading it and have sprinkled through hints about what the conclusion will be. How many of you have picked up an evaluation from a transfer kid, read it, and you get to the end, the conclusion, the eligibility determination, you go, oh, wow, I didn't see that coming. They're OHI. I didn't see that coming. So what I want to do is I'm going to show you how to sprinkle or weave throughout your eval report the information that we need. So I also like to include a paragraph straight from mom in my evaluation report where I'm asking her, what are your concerns directly related to your child's health condition? What are you concerned about with the health condition? If the team has determined that PT or OT evals are a necessary part of your initial or your reevaluation, put a bug in the ear of the PT and the OT that you're suspecting this may be an OHI eligibility kiddo, and watch for and document if you see either limited strength, vitality, alertness, or heightened alertness. And then I always hand them the definition of those. When you are talking to your psych examiner that is doing your cognitive testing and your counselor that may be doing your academic testing, do the same thing. Put a bug in their ear. Say, would you really analyze any limited strength, vitality, or alertness that you're going to see when you go in on your one-on-one assessment with this kiddo? And can you please add that extra information to your report for me? Another thing that you should be doing is throughout the body of the report is talking about whatever the medical condition is, repeating it. And then we've already talked a little bit, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper with those classroom observations that are required in multiple settings or a variety of settings. And like Jeannie said, and I've said this when I do my training, yes, you could probably do it all in one observation if you're going to follow the child from first period to second period, watch him in the hallway. So it could be one long running observation. I don't think any of us have the time to do that. In all probability, it's going to be a couple of different observations. What you feel you're able to glean from those observations to support your eligibility decision, it's going to tell you whether you need more observations or 2 or 3, you're done. So going on to an example. So I told you that I really want to know that the medical condition, if it's the history of a medical condition, if it's available. Here is an example that I saw in a reevaluation, and I'm going to use the same evaluation that I looked at. This is a reeval. This is a child by the name of Joe, and Joe has CP. And again, this is going to be the next several slides. We're going to talk about this child. So when I look at the example of the medical history, what I really liked is mom is reporting. She talked about her pregnancy all the way through. It was good. But then it's important to note, Joe was born prematurely and he only weighed 2.5 pounds. Another part of the history that's important to take away is Joe had a stroke at birth. He was then very quickly identified as a baby that would have cerebral palsy. All the way through developmental milestones, Joe was behind. He's had years of physical therapy and occupational therapy, starting with first steps. That's another great piece to weave into the history. He was evaluated in Kansas City, Missouri by Children's Mercy Hospital. And in addition to CP, he really has immune deficits. He's super susceptible to colds and flus. He has a lot of impaired body movements. He has abnormal reflexes, floppiness, or rigidity. He has abnormal posture. And because of the stroke, he has an evidence all along, starting through first steps, of having memory deficits. So as we talk about the history, do you see how I'm beginning to build the information for OHI? I'm really covering the medical piece. So that's, when I think about OHI, I think it's got 3 letters. I have to cover 3 pieces. I have to cover the medical condition, the limited strength, vitality, alertness, and I have to cover adverse educational impact. OHI, 3 letters, 3 requirements. So I also said that I like, maybe hopefully you might like as well, that we'd have just a little blurb in there. Mom, what are your specific concerns with this medical condition in the educational setting? This mom was really worried about simple tasks. He's not remembering them because of the stroke. She really thinks he's more capable of learning much more material if we, the educators, can figure out the right way to work with his brain and his learning. She's also really worried about his ability to navigate the school environment safely because he has crutches. He also has a walker, or if he's very tired, he will be using his wheelchair. Completing simple tasks, mom says, is really difficult because of the CP, especially for anything to do with writing and memory recall. With this kiddo, there was a separate physical therapy evaluation. So this is a snippet. In the body of the eval report, I have the whole entire physical therapy assessment as we usually see them. But what's extra for this OHI child is I asked the physical therapist to remember limited strength, vitality, and alertness. And with the definitions that I handed them, I said, if you see it, could you please document it clearly for my evaluation report to substantiate my position? They did. So what they pulled out, or this physical therapist pulled out, was that Joe exhibited limited strength and endurance, both throughout the day when he was using his crutches or just his walker. The mobility devices caused him to tire easily and therefore needing time to gain his breath and rest several minutes before continuing navigating through the school building. The physical therapist noted that he became very tired and needed to transition to his wheelchair for the remainder of that specific day. So that was an additional piece that the PT put into the normal large report that they all give us. So going on with that, We did an OT eval for this kiddo as well. And we had our normal report where Joe had difficulty stringing small beads, sorting cards, drawing a straight line. We noticed that we were looking at processing speed, copying a circle or a triangle, all the normal things we'd see with an OT eval, noting the deficits. And again, I asked the therapist, I said, watch for these things. If you see them, would you mind noting it as an extra piece, please? So they noticed that Joe demonstrated fine motor fatigue and required extra time between tasks to rest. He demonstrated daily limited endurance. He has used his speech to text device, which has been successful in helping him with writing activities due to his lack of fine motor endurance for a writing paper pencil task. On days that he was showing exhaustion, he does have a para with him. That's important to note. And that para would do all the scribing for him. So again, this is a snippet out of the OT report, but do you see how all the way through the report, I am building the limited strength, vitality, alertness due to CP. When my psych examiner came in to evaluate Joe, I asked for the same thing. And so we all know that with our assessments, whatever the assessment is, we talk about the behavioral observations during the testing. Most of the time it's average, normal. There's nothing different from any other kid. In this one, this particular psych examiner does a quick little blurb, and she did notice a little bit of unusualness. And she said he had trouble with time tests, and he did require extra extended time during the assessment due to fatigue. So that psych examiner, she took special note on some of the subtests of the cognitive report. So again, this is a snippet. You've got all your charts and your graphs and your explanation for the parent. But again, here's my little extra piece. They did highlight that mental control due to the stroke, there was a problem with holding information. Short-term memory, there was a problem. Digit span did show a weakness in mental control. And it does show that with Joe, he will have slow processing to learn and maintain new learning pieces. And going on with the cognitive report, again, there's a lot of the normal things that you would see, but we pulled out processing speed. The psych examiner noted that this is a weakness. This is where Joe lacks mental energy to process visual material. He did very poorly compared to some of his other subtests in this. And that processing speed was definitely an indication that Joe's mental processing was much slower than other people due to lack of strength and endurance. So moving on now, let's talk a little bit about your academic assessments. Joe was given a key math because we really see in math and written expression, that's where the adverse educational impact is very strong. So again, they did a little snippet about the behavioral observations during the key math test. And what was a little different, Joe did tire very easily. And again, he needed frequent breaks, just like the IQ examiner did show. All right, so let's talk a little bit about formal observations. I like to tell people that I understand the checklists are faster and easier and it provide an ease for everyone, but I'm going to tell you that that doesn't individualize the child. So if you want to use the checklist, that's wonderful, use them, but add more and more and more, add narratives. So when you are thinking about your formal classroom assessments for any qualifying area, but today we're talking about OHI, please go in and observe the child. When you go in and observe the child, just speak factually and tell me what is happening within the classroom when you walked in. Paint a picture of what that classroom looked like and what are the child's behaviors as compared to the learning, the lesson that is going on. So observe and reflect how the child's behavior might be interfering with the learning, if that's what's happening. Show me the limited strength, vitality, and alertness during the observation if it's there. That will support your conclusion, your eligibility determination. Compare the child that you're looking at to the neighboring, not normal developing peer and do a comparison. What's happening? Let the teacher know you're coming in to look specifically at the student. When you are in there, ask the teacher to call on the student so that we could check and see how the child is progressing with the learning that's in the classroom. I like to recommend that your observations are written in a narrative form that talk about the classroom and how this child specifically that you are looking at is learning or having difficulty with learning. Make sure it's individualized to the child. Checklists are nice. You can add them, include them, but then give me the narrative that individualizes this child. See the adverse educational impact by the medical condition. Label, use those words. Show me what is the limited strength that the child is showing, but then explain it. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. So again, my disclaimer, this is a snippet. We're going to talk about Joe's in the regular ed classroom for language arts. This is really an area where the adverse educational impact from the CP results in limited strength and causes him great difficulty. He's come into the classroom at the same time as the observer. He's using his crutches. He is not in his wheelchair. He had difficulty opening the door. His para was there. He was self-advocating to let me do it myself, please stand back. When the teacher called the students to the front to the class for the smart board, he was showing limited strength for his posture, indicated poor trunk control. He was slouching. He was tired. He had a great deal of physical difficulty going from his crutches to the floor, but he wanted to because he's very independent, and going on with the exact same observation in the next slide. Amy, did you click it? Jeannie, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. I don't know, maybe Amy can.
Amy, can you hear us?
I believe she's frozen.
Okay.
And I don't think any of the rest of us can.
Yeah, we don't have the PowerPoint to help you move through.
Right.
Okay.
If you want to send it to one of us by email, Jeannie, do you have co-host capability?
Yeah.
If you have co-host capability, send it real quick to Jeannie via email and she can bring it up.
Well, and I see that Amy just got off, so she might be trying to log right back on.
And we can give her a second. I do have the PowerPoint that Amy sent to me and I can forward it.
She just sent me a text that said, I think a worker hit something. University lost power.
Okay. Well, the PowerPoint and
Well, this is fun. Just
I'm
open-
laughing because that exact thing happened at SEMO last week because we're tearing down our big stadium right next door and they hit a wire and it completely had a campus-wide outage. So I feel Amy's pain.
Okay.
Okay. Do you have it, Julie? If you send it to me.
I do. Let's see if okay. Everybody knows that I am the worst with technology. Let's see.
I have it right now and I'm forwarding it to Jeannie.
Okay.
It's on its way, Jeannie.
All righty. Hang on. I gotta get it.
In the meantime, are there any questions, Bev, in the chat that need to be answered?
There are some questions in the chat. I put responses in the chat, I think. Now I can't find my chat box back.
Oh, wow.
I feel
Today-
so inadequate. It's here someplace. I had it dragged over to a different screen so it wouldn't be covering my, but then when we switched presenters,
I think the biggest thing that's going on in the chat is about autism being either OHI, if it could be considered OHI. And Bev's done a really good job at kind of describing in the chat that. Can
you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay, I got to figure out where we were.
Go, yeah, keep keep going. You're close. Click in one so I can see. Okay,
Go
go.
that far.
Nope. Go back one.
Oh.
Go back again. Go back again. There. All right, there.
There.
All right,
Okay.
go forward one. Go forward one. All right, so this is where we lost power. I apologize from all of us. I am so sorry. So this is where we were, and I was explaining to you that this is a classroom observation, and I need you to weave within the classroom observation two pieces: the limited strength, vitality, or alertness, whichever one you're using, or all of them. And I need you to be talking about the adverse educational impact. So going on to the next slide, I am continuing on with classroom observations. This is still one long observation. I'm just pulling out anything you see in red is backing up my OHI eligibility decision. So continuing on with this particular lesson, this is they're talking about Alaska, and they're asking questions about Alaska and how it gets dark at night and all of those kind of things. So what was noted during the observation was due to the cerebral palsy and the stroke at birth, Joe had a great deal of difficulty remaining focused during the classroom lesson. He was frequently called upon to help maintain his focus by his teacher. She would call on him so that he would stay engaged, and it would help him stay together. Then the rest of the observation is just what we saw. He was working with a partner. He worked well with a partner. He didn't know some of the answers to the questions, but he did know others. So we noted that. So going on to the next slide. This is where the teacher who was doing the classroom observation pulled it all together for us. So in the same, we've had 3 slides of the same observation. So here within the same body, here's how she tied it up. Joe appeared to tire easily during the lesson. He did have trouble remaining focused. He had difficulty navigating his environment because he wanted to use his crutches, which was his choice, instead of his walker or his wheelchair. He was visibly tired from all the movements during the class period. It was one of those class periods where you got up and you came to the front, then you went back to your seat, and he wanted to participate, self-advocating. His little hand shook as he attempted to hold his pencil to begin his writing of his paragraph. At one point during the observation, Joe put his head down on his desk, indicating to the observer lack of stamina, lack of endurance. He rested for several minutes and appeared to be doing better, and he began to write again on his paper. The teacher asked Joe if he would like to use his speech-to-text device or have the para scribe for him. And he said, no, thank you. He wanted to go ahead and try to do it like all of his friends were doing it. He wanted to keep doing it. His teacher stated later to the observer that Joe needs to typically rest during language arts class. He needs a rest period during that class. She noted that he has memory recall deficits from, especially when we are talking about the previous day's learning and lesson. It's difficult for Joe to remember. So I thought they tied it all up purposely and brought it into the OHI realm. So as you know, we need more than one observation. So there was language arts that's showing the educational impact as well as the limited strength, vitality, and alertness. So then Joe was observed in the next slide. He was observed in the area of math. And math is another area where he continued to have difficulty, in addition to language arts being really hard on him. So again, it's a normal observation. You walk in, you talk about what the class is going to look like. This observation was going to zero in on 2 areas, math calc and math problem solving. We talk about how Joe came into the room. We talked about what the lesson was, how many kids are in the classroom, where is Joe seated. It was the last period of the day, which is important to note. So on this specific day during the observation, Joe was very visibly tired by the end of the day. His hands shook and they were now in a clenched position where he could not release the clench. Because he was lacking core body strength, the paraprofessional had done a cross body strap to keep his body up into the wheelchair, his torso, to prevent him from leaning too far forward. At this point in time, at the end of the day, the para was responsible for finding all of his materials in his bag, putting them out on the desk. As the lesson began, the students were asked to complete a math calculation problem exercise, a paper pencil exercise, resulting from the previous day's lesson. Joe had a great deal of difficulty remembering the day before his lesson. His para had to write, she was scribing everything for him. He was too tired to begin to write any of the problems. She really had to reteach him 10 minutes during the lesson. She took 10 minutes to reteach Joe the important points from yesterday's lesson. It was evident that his short-term memory deficits from the stroke at birth had really impacted him. And the para really had to guide Joe throughout the entire lesson, prompting and helping provide those answers for him. Key point, lots of difficulty with memory, end of the day. Child is exhausted due to the medical condition. There is a medical condition, you're seeing limited strength, vitality, alertness, and you see the educational impact. So remember, these are snippets, but the whole point is I've sprinkled all the way through the evaluation report. There's no surprise at the end of this. I think if you read this eval report, you know that this is going to be an OHI child. I built it, I've made a foundation. So let's talk about your conclusion. Some of you call your conclusion your synthesis. Some of you call it a basis for determination. Whatever you call it, I want to talk about some pieces that you need or would like to include in your conclusion. So here we go. Let's talk about the basis or the determination for an OHI eligibility. I like to explain to people, start off with exactly what we're talking about in your conclusion. Bingo. The multidisciplinary team has determined that Joe continues to be identified as a student with another health impairment. Yay. Due to his medical diagnosis of CP and the continued need for special education and supports. Joe has a comprehensive medical report on file. He's one of those kiddos that does have a comprehensive medical report that we had. And then we went on and we say, Joe was diagnosed at the age of 6 months with CP from Dr. John Smith, MD, Children's Mercy Hospital, KCMO. His medical condition of CP is acute and chronic. Joe exhibits hourly and daily limited strength and vitality due to the CP, which affects his physical activity because of the use of the wheelchair, the crutches, and the walker. Joe exhibits impaired movement associated with abnormal reflexes, floppiness, or rigidity of his limbs and his trunk, abnormal posture, involuntary movements, unsteady walking, and a combination of all of these. Right off the bat, put it all in there, but individualize it to the child. Don't just tell me Joe has limited strength, vitality, and alertness. Tell me more, tell me more, tell me how. So going on with this particular part of the eval, let's go to the next slide and we're going to look at the determinations as we continue. Tell me, now zero in on that limited strength, vitality, and alertness. Zero in on it. Joe exhibits a short attention span, motor planning difficulties, organization and sequence of movement, and noted perceptual difficulties due to the stroke, which occurred at birth. He also exhibits a heightened alertness and requires prompting to remain focused on the task at hand and requires larger amounts of time to complete everyday tasks. He has difficulty with all fine and gross motor tasks, specifically when writing any type of paper pencil tasks. He lacks endurance and stamina to complete school assignments as well as remaining focused during the class lecture. It is evident that through my classroom observations, and it's noted in this evaluation report, that he does show lack of endurance. Frequently during the day, he shows fatigue. He misses out on the lessons because he is so tired and requires reteaching of the content because he is exhausted and because of his memory deficits. His limited memory deficits cause difficulty with any type of classroom assessments, and he cannot retain material and will need frequent reteaching. Do you see how we are now pulling all the information that we know about Joe? We are putting it together and substantiating and proving our OHI determination. So going on, we have now talked about what is his medical piece. We talked about it. We've talked about who identified him. We've talked about how does it show limited strength and vitality. I've explained it. Now you got to hit that adverse educational impact piece. All right, so remember, OHI, 3 letters, 3 pieces. Medical condition, limited strength, vitality, alertness, and adverse educational impact. Here's the adverse educational impact. We covered what the WIS stated, and please remember that when you are putting down numbers, an IQ of 101 means something to me. It doesn't mean anything to parents. Put in parentheses, simple, average, below average, borderline, superior. So go ahead. So we look at Joe. Everything's pretty average with that IQ, but look at that processing speed. Adverse educational impact. Then let's look at the Wyatt. So we gave him an academic assessment, and as you look through it, you can really see where are the strengths and where is the educational impact. Written expression, whoo, it's hitting, you can really see it. Anything to do with mathematics, because he tires so much in math, it's really showing that adverse educational impact. And you can go back to my observations and you can see it. I've noted it. And then we went deeper. So we went into math. We did a key math in addition to the broad academic assessment. We did a key math, and you can really see the deficit areas in that key math. And again, please remember, put down the score, but put down a simple little word so mom and dad, aunt and uncle, grandma can understand. What does that 99 mean? What's that 68 mean? All right, so going on, we have now hit the medical condition. We have talked about limited strength, vitality, and alertness specifically, and we have talked about educational impact. Draw it together. Give me one of those great last paragraphs. Joe's OHI, his other health impairment due to CP, adversely affects him in the educational setting and written expression, math calc, math problem solving. We went in and we talked a little bit about the grade. He functions on a first grade 7th month, etc. We again talked about really lots of difficulty with paper pencil tasks due to the medical condition. He tires easily. He needs frequent breaks. He has short-term memory deficits, and he has difficulty with classroom assessments that have anything to do with writing and memory or memorization. We tied it up in a really great conclusion paragraph. And then let's go on to the next slide. So as you can see, there are a number of paragraphs to your conclusion for OHI to hit all of our pieces. And so lastly, Joe continues, this is a reeval kiddo for other OHI. He met Missouri State guidelines. Most noted educational concerns at this point in time for Joe is math calc and language arts, paper pencil tasks, anything to do with memorization. Any long class assignments are very difficult, as is memory. And please remember, memory does really affect all of his subject areas. And please remember, again, these are snippets. All right, so now we did weave in just 3 or 4 slides on some legal, some really short little legal pieces that we wanted to put in to talk a little bit about OHI. So this first case is from the state of California. Addressing eligibility under OHI, this particular administrative law judge noted that while a California elementary kiddo did have medical conditions of ADHD, post-traumatic stress disorder, fetal alcohol syndrome, which could all be qualifying educational health conditions, the mere evidence that a child suffers from a medical or a DSM-5 diagnosis does not mean he or she will meet the criteria for special ed under IDEA. Listen to this piece. Without evidence that these conditions impaired her vitality, strength, or alertness at school, or that she needed specialized instruction to access the curriculum, the student was found not eligible for special education because there was no adverse educational impact, there was no limited strength, vitality, or alertness. So that, I think that answers the question that comes up all the time was, hey, they've got a medical condition. Okay, remember the three pieces: medical condition, limited strength, vitality, alertness, and adverse educational impact. So Amy had mentioned something about this early on. Please remember that you are looking at the child as they are presented to you today. So in this particular case coming out of Hawaii, the independent hearing officer, when they were looking at OHI, the district should focus on the student's current needs. The very fact that a progressive disease will cause a child to have excessive abscesses down the road in the future does not establish the child's need for eligibility at this time. So we've got another case this one is coming out of the great state of Pennsylvania. In this particular court case, the court pointed out that the student's skill in reading, math, science, and social studies were at his grade level or near his grade level. Thus, the student with ADHD, there's the medical piece, and oppositional defiant disorder could learn in a mainstream classroom, regular classroom setting. He did not qualify for special education under OHI category because there was no evidence that his ADHD adversely affected his educational performance. All right, so let's look at another quick case, and we're almost ready to wrap up. I know we've gone over time, and I apologize so much for the glitch with technology. So we're going to look at this slide and one other one as far as our court cases. So this, I'm going to just hit the second one. This is coming out of the District of Columbia Public Schools, which is DC. This is a student who had symptoms related to ADHD, such as impulsivity and hyperactivity, which might have made him eligible for services under OHI because he's got the medical condition. However, according to an evaluator, the child's difficulty didn't impede his academic performance at school. The independent hearing officer pointed out that the middle school student was receiving passing grades and had received passing scores on standard tests, and there was also state tests. It was therefore reasonable for the child's team to determine that the student's ADHD did not adversely affect their educational performance. Therefore, they were not found eligible for OHI. The court found in favor of the school. And this one will just simply look at a Texas district and did not violate IDEA when it determined that a ninth grader with ADHD was not eligible for special ed and related services. Although the student had behavioral problems resulting in disciplinary actions, including an expulsion from a public school, the federal judge concluded that the student's academic success in the public school showed that special education services were not necessary. And then lastly, the mere fact that a high school junior was diagnosed with ADHD, this is coming out of Ohio, did not entitle him to special ed services under IDEA because the disability did not adversely affect the student's educational performance. Yes, he did have a health condition, but it did not adverse him educationally in any way, shape, or form. So it was found in favor of the school system. And next slide, please. Thank you, Jeannie, for doing this.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, my computer just, half the time doesn't want to switch.
It's okay. We're almost there. This is the last slide, everybody. So thank you out there for hanging on with us. So here we go. Let's pull it together. This is it. Key points to remember for OHI. OHI has 3 letters. It stands for medical condition, limited strength, vitality, and alertness, and adverse educational impact. All 3 have to fit together or the child is not eligible. So please remember, conduct a thorough evaluation, get that adverse educational impact through your testing, and then show it in your observations. Use the words limited endurance, limited strength, but then back it up with an example. Ensure your evaluation meets all the requirements set forth in the Standards and Indicators Manual. Turn to the 1300s, read them, study them, implement it in your eval report. Ensure that the evaluation information is showing from the beginning of your evaluation report all the way through. Sprinkle the information through. Ensure that you're showing educational adverse impact that relates back to the medical condition, whatever it is. Ensure that now this is really important, ensure that your evaluation report is sufficient and comprehensive enough that if you hand it to another educator who is a stranger that does not know Joe, that they could, based on the eval report that you've written that is so good, they could write a quality present level performance, which would drive the goal creation and then the instruction for the child. And we have one more slide just to talk about a few references that may be beneficial to you. So we have some resources, and you all know that these are recorded and they will be posted, within a few days. We have a Jim Dandy of a December Myth of the Month. It really points out we all have that parent walk in and hand us that script that says, Julie has ADHD, she needs an IEP, get on it. So we've got information in there on how to handle that. Remember that when you're looking at adverse educational impact, you are not talking about a 1.5 standard deviation. That is for LD, you're not having to hit that number with OHI. We talk about that in the Myth of the Month. It's a really good one. So make sure you go and look at it when you're wanting to know more about this. And then, of course, the chat questions that have been in here, eventually we will get them all put together and we'll post those as well. So we're going to go to the very last slide of the presentation today. And it's simply a wrap-up slide. Please reach out to any of us. Make sure you know your compliance consultant in your region. We are here to help you. That's all we're here to help. We're here to support in any way that you need help. If you have other questions and you would like to speak to a DESE supervisor, they're fantastic folks. They are there to help as well. So this concludes our lengthy OHI presentation. I hope it's helpful. Please remember OHI has 3 letters and you're looking for 3 pieces to weave throughout the body of your evaluation report. Thank you so much for your time and joining us today. Look on the DESE website under Special Education Director Resources, and this will be posted in the next couple of weeks. Thank you so much for your time today. We know it's valuable. Hope you have a great rest of the day. Bye, everybody.